This is Vace. He designs digital renderings and prints physical 3D models of custom pieces of jewelry for clients. Vace works in a 3D design program called CAD, a skill which, for the most part, he taught himself, which is incredibly impressive given what he's about to do here. We're about to watch him work on designs for 2 different rings. Here, Vace is preparing for the placement of the diamonds on the client's model. Now he actually begins to place all of the individual stones. Once he's satisfied with his placement in the first region, he clones the sequence of jewels to the remaining sides of this portion of the ring. He then moves on to the creation of the full structure of the ring itself. He starts by examining the piece from all angles, making minor readjustments if he notices any inconsistencies. The brown and blue pegs signify the placement of small holes for the stones to rest inside, which Vace carves out digitally. The final image he's about to show us is referred to as a 3D wax. So now that we've got an idea of how he works, let's move on to a brand new ring design. This is going to be a wedding band with marquees and squares. He begins with a full box, which he empties to create space for the diamond. Next, he orients the individual squares onto a circular spine and spaces them accordingly. He then creates the marquee shapes and does the same thing, alternating between the two. He creates a braided element and places it within the hollowed marquee shape, and clones it to the other side like he did with the diamonds in the first design. Finally, he creates the prongs of the ring and examines it in a realistic digital 3D rendering. Now it's time to bring his design to the other room. We're going to take a look at how Vace's 3D printer operates. The machine uses wax to print a perfectly accurate physical model of the ring. Even though this isn't the design we just saw Vace make on the computer, the printer is still performing the exact same process. So, thus completes Vace's role in the creation of a piece of jewelry. Let's move on. This is Marco Delano's office. Marco and his team specialize in the polishing portion of the jewelry making process, and Rob assures me that in New York City, he's the best there is. What we're looking at now are various electronic plating instruments. This simple piece will be the foundation in which an intricate array of diamonds will sit, and what happens here is the first step. First, she removes the piece from a boiling pot. The raw structure goes into what's called a tumbler, which contains small beads made of glass and metal which beat against the object repeatedly and give the surface a brighter shine. It usually stays in there for a few hours. The man you see here is actually Marco's son. Once he removes the piece from the tumbler and cleans it, he brings it over to Marco for polishing. The process that Marco is performing here is known as lapping. It helps to ensure that every edge of the piece that Marco works on is perfectly straight. He makes sure not to miss anything, getting in between all of the prongs and using different compounds for different areas to ensure it has a bright finish before the diamonds are eventually set. I couldn't help but notice that Marco's hands have an incredibly distinctive look to them, one that can only be acquired with time and experience. The piece is now ready for setting. Before we see the stones set in this piece, however, we're going to head over to Carlo's office to watch what's definitely the most intricate and small-scale step in the jewelry making process. This is Carlo's office. We can see him hidden behind this statue in what anyone might confuse for a science lab. Carlo is a micropave artist with an emphasis on the word artist. Right now he's preparing shellac, as he will be micropaveing a thin metal wire for us. He puts pressure on the wire and places it directly into the shellac in order to hold it steady. Carlo works at such an incredibly small and detailed scale that he actually needs to use a large digital microscope in order to see closely enough to do his job. So we have to observe the process on an external monitor in order to see what Carlo sees. First, he marks the spots where the 4 tiny diamond stones will each sit, and then proceeds to drill out the areas. Once he creates space for each diamond, he places it within its setting in order to make an initial assessment as to its fit. He's only able to cut about 3 of these diamonds per day because despite their small size, they have the same number of facets as an engagement stone, which is around 56. He carves in slight grooves so that each stone can sit further down within its setting. Once the diamonds are properly seated in place, he uses an engraving tool to create a small prong, which will actually go over each stone in order to hold it in place. Then, he clears away the excess metal from around each prong. This is why the process is called pave, which is the French word for pave. He is essentially paving into the small stone and metal structures. He continues with the engraving tool, removing the excess metal from around each of the prongs. Pretty soon we will have the finished product. It is truly remarkable how thin the metal wire is to the naked eye. We took a quick walk over to Eddie's office. Eddie is a setter and he's going to be working on the piece that we left in Marco's office earlier on. Right now, he is selecting the individual diamonds that he will be using in the piece. He sifts through piles and piles of miniature stones to find the perfect ones by running them through these metal filters, each of which contain holes with slight variations in diameter. Once the stones are chosen, he drills open each designated spot to allow every stone to sit properly in a process called pinpoint setting. In this type of setting, the prongs already exist. Watch as he individually sets each and every stone by hand. He then forces all of the prongs over the stones he just set to hold them in place permanently. Finally, he begins to place the center stone. This is actually the client's diamond, which is essentially being recontextualized or rehoused in a new setting. This is Steve. He's another jeweler who works in the same office as Rob and Eddie. Steve is going to be taking this diamond centerpiece and connecting it to a new chain. Once he has measured it properly, he divides the chain in half so that he can center the main piece. He also clips off a very small portion to ensure that the size is set perfectly. He uses what's called a Hulk torch to apply solder to one part of the chain. It's a process that can be done incredibly quickly, as Steve just showed us, but only if it's done perfectly. That pad above the Hulk torch that Steve has been working on and around helps to heat everything evenly. Steve is considered to be very quick at this process, but he also uses an incredibly small amount of solder. Once the piece cools off, he places it in acid to get rid of what's called fire scale, a result of contact with the flame. He then polishes the specific areas that he soldered. He buffs the piece and places it in an ultrasonic. The electronic cleaner helps to sterilize the piece so that it can be plated. He puts a platinum finish over the top of the area where he worked, as solder itself has a different color than the actual chain. Then, he plates the piece in a step called rhodium plating. The bubble you were about to see indicates the adhering of the platinum to the gold. Finally, we can see the original chain, side by side with its new finished counterpart. For the final portion of the project, I travel out to Rob's store on Long Island, the jewelry studio in Plainview. This is where everything eventually comes together. There's a large and diverse showroom in the front and a comfortable studio area in the back, where Marla can always be found creating any number of things. Right now, she is working on a pair of earrings that she's making out of sterling silver. After she properly shapes the earrings, she solders them together. Solder always goes towards heat, which is why it is used from both sides. Now, Marla is cutting out the metal from around a different piece, also an earring. She then sands off the excess. Later that afternoon, Marla shows me a technique where she pierces out various hand-drawn shapes into a piece of silver to eventually be used as a necklace. First, she uses a drill to create the initial holes within the block of silver, and then she slips the small saw blade through the hole in order to more precisely cut out the shapes for her exact liking. Marla then moves on to perform a process called fusing, which she will use to make a ring out of silver. She shapes the frame of the ring around a tool called the mandrel. She forms the ring into a perfectly round shape and applies what's called flux. Then, she sets it on a carbon block. Now she takes a few other strands of small silver wire and fuses them to the main silver frame. Marla's unique approach to the creation of jewelry made it clear that her work and the work of all of the other jewelers throughout this process that we have seen is as much of an art as it is a craft or a service. Whether it be the process of creation or the end result, all of them exhibit a personal stylistic sense that is truly their own. The last step of all before selling a piece of jewelry is usually to photograph or catalog it. I caught up with Rob about a week later to photograph the finished ring that we saw Vache designing and printing in the beginning of the film. I found it incredibly humbling to watch a simple color-coded 3D rendering I saw only on a computer screen transform into a work of art, passing through the hands of true masters of their craft, each of whom undoubtedly left their mark, or in some cases I supposed removed it, from the piece.